We have a humanitarian crisis in our jails and a constitutional crisis in our courts with the current state of the cash bail system. When a person is arrested and they're booked into jail, they are subjected to, depending on the jurisdiction, a bond schedule, for example, which is a pre-printed list of crimes with predetermined amounts attached to each crime. And so upon booking around the country in many jurisdictions, the booking officer will tell the arrested person, the accused person, who's still innocent at that point, of course, because the only thing that's happened at that point is a bare allegation. But the booking officer will give that person a dollar amount, basically, that they can pay to buy their freedom. And that dollar amount is completely arbitrary, and it results in wealth-based detention. Then from there, if a person is in a jurisdiction where they can appear in front of a judge within 24 or 48 hours, that's great. But most jurisdictions, people are sitting in jail for days before they even see the judge for the first time. So they've already missed work, missed appointments, haven't been able to take medication, their children are left without their parent or loved one, etc.
Okay, well, just a little knowledge. I have no felonies. I'm 34 years old. I have no felonies on my record. Yet I've been arrested like 14 times. I've only been charged. I've probably been arrested like 16 times. I've only been charged for nonviolent misdemeanor arrest and disturbing the peace and driving a car without consent, which is 3 charges. But mind you, I've been locked up on 16 different charges, all been dropped. You know, because most of the time when you get locked up, the cop always trumps up your charges and tries to get you on stuff that's illegal and hopes you just cop a plea. You know what I mean? And all the time, you know, I mostly had the bail. They give you a bail. They don't just let you out of your own account. So they usually have to.
Once they do appear in front of the judge for the first time, many jurisdictions do not have lawyers for them, so they are unrepresented. And they weren't even provided notice that they were going to have a bail hearing so that they can be prepared for what they need to argue against, because the government has the burden of showing that they're either going to willfully avoid prosecution or that they're going to be a danger to the community, which is vague and broad in and of itself. But then at that hearing, what we find around the country is that those hearings last mere seconds. So in jurisdictions where there is a bond schedule that I mentioned, judges typically will just automatically rubber stamp that same dollar amount. And folks are not given the opportunity to even ask any questions. And equally as important, the judge doesn't ask any individualized questions in an individualized hearing of that person to see, are there ties to the community? How long have you lived here? Are you working? If you are, how much do you make? Are you on public benefits, etc.? The judge has to make the analysis of whether the person's going to return to court or whether they're going to be a danger to the community, like I said. And it should be based on clear and convincing evidence that the government presents. And the judge should be, you know, certainly evaluating criminal history, et cetera, which is also problematic. We can get into that a little bit later, but the judge can certainly make a consideration based on different factors, but the presumption should be released without any conditions at all. And if that presumption is overcome by the government's evidence, clear and convincing evidence to show that the person is going to willfully avoid prosecution or be a danger to the community, then the judge should consider less restrictive alternatives before they even get to the point of talking about cash bail. Cash bail should only be imposed in rare situations. And when it's imposed, it must be done after due process protections are in place. So the reason we're seeing bail reform happen around the country generally is because we know that approximately, according to the Prison Policy Initiative, approximately 620,000 people are in jail pre-trial. 320,000 of them are in jail on low-level misdemeanor crimes, nonviolent misdemeanor crimes. 149,000 of them are on violent charges, or allegations, I should say. But 320,000 people, right, on low-level misdemeanor charges. And at any point in time, we know 500,000 people every day, every night are in jail on low-level misdemeanor charges, and they can't afford to pay the bond amount. That costs us money. Pretrial detention is the #1 driver of mass incarceration.
What we passed was a law that is pretty remarkable for all arrests. And what it also did was not only take money out of the equation, but also the possibility of using jail. And so now, like for most people who are arrested, charged with misdemeanor and nonviolent felony offenses, they automatically get to go home. There's no question of, will I lose my job as a result of this arrest? Will my kids be taken away? Will I be sitting inside a jail cell uncertain of what's going to happen to me? And what that does for a system is it actually, for one thing, keeps people's lives and families together in a way that we don't tend to talk about when we talk about an arrest and incarceration, but we very much know it's true. It also, for the system, saves a tremendous amount of money and resources. So some of the impacts that we've seen just, literally in our first year of bail reform is today we have about 40% fewer people in jail across New York State than we had at this time last year. That's how impactful this law has been. So some of the impacts that we've seen just, literally in our first year of bail reform is today we have about 40% fewer people in jail across New York State than we had at this time last year. That's how impactful this law has been. Critics of it say that bail reform has compromised public safety. That one case where somebody got released because of the new bail reform and went out and did something terrible, and that's the story that shapes people's public perception of how bail reform is working. Here's what the hard numbers are, and this is true across New York State, which is crime is at the same rate and same level as it was at this time last year before bail reform was passed. But if your perception of like public safety and crime is based on the media and those outlier cases, of course you feel less safe. It's natural, but it's actually not the reality. It's not reflected in the numbers. That said, has there been more harm and violence this year? Yeah, there's been in New York City especially an uptick in two kinds of offenses, in homicides and shootings. And what we've seen though is, it's not bail reform that is directly responsible for that. There was a New York Post article from July that actually looked at the 11,000 people that have been released from local jail in New York City since the beginning of the year, both through bail reform and as a result of responding to COVID-19. And of those 11,000 people, less than 1% were involved in any kind of gun crime or shooting.
Pretrial detention is the #1 driver of mass incarceration in this country. And it's not just the fact that it creates well-spaced detention, but think of all of the other rights that are at play at this point. If you are in jail and you can't afford to get out, then the coercive pressure you feel to plead guilty grows exponentially. And if you end up pleading guilty, you're not forcing the police officers to have to prove their investigation. You're not forcing the prosecutors to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt at trial. You are just trying to get out of jail. And so all of your other constitutional rights then go out the window as well.
Because they're mad because a lot of good people are getting out on bail and beating their case later. You know what I mean? Like you're supposed to do in real life instead of you being forced into shock treatment. Because that's shock treatment. When you put somebody in jail, it's cold and all these different changes, that's making them so scared when they just go in court and be like, okay, I did it. I just want to go home. You know? Now you have a felon. They can't vote. They can't own a gun. You know what I mean? They can't fly out of the country.
So it has unbelievably devastating effect, certainly on Black and Brown communities specifically. But this is a poor person's problem. Poor people are the ones who are subjected to cash bail and the effects of cash bail. Most families, and studies have shown, most families don't have an emergency budget of $400. We know that the vast majority of people can't afford the average amount of bail in this country, which is $10,000. And even if you use the bail bondsman, that's $1,000 that you have to come up with. And a lot of families don't have that to come up with. A lot of families don't have, you know, a title to a car or a title to a house to even exchange for someone's freedom, even if they could get the 10% bond. So, you know, bail reform means as well that when we're establishing whether or not a person has the ability to pay, we're talking about their current ability to pay, not their ability to pay if they have to go to a check cashing place, if they have to pull money off of a credit card and then they're going to accumulate interest later, if they have to, you know, again, give up titles to their property. If you have to do that, that means you can't afford the bond amount. And so when we say current ability to pay, we're talking about what do you have access to? Certainly, the government has a right to say, well, you can ask your wife, your kids, your family members. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, you try doing that, and mostly everybody goes, I can't do that. You need to wait for your court date. We're just going to get thrown out. You know what I mean? I don't have that kind of credit. I don't have the money. My neighbor tried to sign for my bond at first. He couldn't sign for my bond. And, but at that time, it did affect my family because I had my daughter was 2 months old, and I couldn't see my daughter, you know. And I just disappeared for like a month. I literally disappeared for like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you know, like, and like that's a long time to be away from your baby, you know.
Yeah.